2015, we were hit with a massive crisis.
あ、そういうことで
Hundreds
し
of
た。
thousands of
まあ、正直
migrants coming to
なん
Europe's
だけど、
shores.
もう、
And that is not the
もう、
case anymore.
多
It
分
is true
今頃
that the
警察
overall
庁、
numbers
最高
have
検察
decreased.
庁、法務
But
省
is
国
that
家、
enough? Is it
多
enough
分
to just
4
look
機
at
関
the
の
overall
幹部た
numbers?
ち、今頃
Or
ね、
should one
揉
also
めてるやろ
focus
さ、
on what's
永田
happening
クーデターね、ブラッ
within
クフライ
each
デー、
EU country?
ブラックフラ
And I
イデ
say
ーね、
that
ク
because
ーデ
there
ター
are
ね、
certain EU
あ
countries,
あ、
such as
ね、多
Greece,
分、
such as Italy,
北
such
村
as
茂
Spain,
元局
which
長た
have
ち、
taken a
呼
far,
ばれたん知って
far
るで、
greater hit
こういう
than
機関中で
others
さ、
when it comes to migration
会議に
crisis.
呼ばれたん知って
And
るで、
yes, the numbers are
長官と
overall
か、
down, but
検事
problems
総長も
do
出席して、
persist in countries
怒られ
like
た
the
の
ones
知って
I
ます
just
よ。
mentioned.
So,
So
あれ
the question one needs to ask
こう
is, has
安
Europe
全保
done
障金融
enough
法
in
さ、
order to alleviate the effects of
本
the
日
crisis
ね、聞き
throughout
てね
the
さ、
entire
これ使え
EU28?
ばよかった。だ
Has
から
Europe
山
done
梨浩
enough
二将軍
in
ま
order
で来
to
て
share
さ、
burden?
見たよ、自衛隊の戦
And I say
軍ま
that
で来て、見
particularly
たよ。
because when one looks at the figures regarding relocation
から、
of refugees
ああ、
across
災害対
Europe,
策基本法
then
か。
one will realize
あ、
that
指定
not
公共機関。
enough
ああ、
has
医
been
療
done in that direction.
福祉の団
And
体。
so
ああ、
one is led to the question,
適用対
what
象だった
kind
ん
of
だよ。
Europe do we want?
さあ、
Do we want a Europe where we all share the benefits of Europe?
使うのや
Or
め
do
よっ
we
て言っ
also
て。
want a Europe
ほん
where
で、あれ、
countries
使わな
also
いな。
share
特措法使う
burdens?
かって。だって言って。で、これ作ろう。じゃあ、もう。心がこんな感じ。こっぴどく。謎の記事。あ、そう。ウィキペディアとか見て、そう。あった。あ、そう。
Well, now it is the end of the JIIA meeting, which was a great meeting. We have had excellent discussions. We have learned a lot, and we have thought a lot. And now I hope to see you in Paris next June. It will be a plenary session, and all of us we shall be there. So please do come to Paris.
女の条文持ってきて。持ってきて。この自衛隊法のさ、今朝あったのか。さあ、見て。あった。本当だったさ。あった。
So I'm Jane Harmon, and the question is, what is the future of political parties? I can speak to the U.S. more than anywhere else. I was a member of our Congress for 9 terms and left because it became so partisan and dysfunctional. At the Wilson Center, we study this, and there are some remedies to the problems. But bottom line, in the U.S., our tradition is 2 parties only. In Europe, there are multi-party systems in most countries. And we're seeing the rise of populist parties. In the U.S., we have no populist party. We have a Republican Party that is now dominated by our president, and we have a Democratic Party where most of the noise is coming from the far left. What we don't have is anything to represent the center, and that is the challenge for the U.S. going forward. That is something I work on, and that is something that the Wilson Center is hoping to improve, because if we are to convey at least a majority view in the United States, essential to making our foreign policy and domestic policy effective, we need to reach for the center so that we have both parties participating. And hopefully we'll advance that goal here at the Trilateral Commission.
大勢は日本の被害最小限になさい。北海道から沖縄まで全部拡大してもらう。揉めました。
So we had a marvelous meeting in Stockholm. We could
もう
address
みん
all
な
the
揉めたい
issues
せい
that
に。
are of very great importance for the European and
もうみんな揉めたいせいに。
it was
あ
marvelously
あ、大変
organized
そ
by
う。
the host
ああ、
of the Swedish
よい
chapter
ペン見てみ
and
て
we
さあ、
appreciated
2020
enormously
だい
their
ぶ中止に
organization.
なったみたい。
All the
ああ、
panelists
中
were
止になって
very,
も
very stimulating and interesting.
ああ、あれ、2020年10月さあ、ヤフー、間違ってさ、誕生しました。ああ、びっくりした。そう、あれ、音楽関係者。あ、びっくりした。すいません、今、そう、いい感じで。
which was again very comprehensive and stimulating, but you will see that in the various video perhaps that you would like to see. Now I have to give
匠君たち
we have rendezvous
言
in
語が増えた方がいい
Washington
です
because it would be the trilateral at the level of the three pillars of the trilateral, the entire world, if I may. And this is a Washington meeting which will take place in
さあもめてもらった
and so there we are with a big rendezvous which would be important
なんで重村ヒーローの CEO たち呼ばれましたそう
issues
そう裁判所に呼ばれましたそう呼ばれたんよ
with a vision of a
呼ばれたんよなんか YouTube に流れてさ重村ヒーローでさ
stock
呼ばれましたそう
technology and
呼ばれてんさ呼ばれ
of innovation and also respect our fellow citizens is attached to democracy, is attached to equality produced by the working of a market economy, a vivid market economy. So, à bientôt.
もう見た
I think that the relations between Russia and the European Union are in the stalemate right now. There has been
だ
no
よ
major
思っ
movement in
た
either
ら
direction.
暴言電話の主はいオスカープロの
Except
古賀誠一でした
the so-called five Federica
古賀誠一でした
almost 4 years ago.
あ
Both sides
島清美の iPhone6 からさ
that time
電話かかってきましたさ
they can sit on
Sa-
their hands waiting
びっ
for
くりした
something
さ
to change.
刑法憲法とかそうかなそういこうプロデューサーかな思ったさ思ったボス
Start creating
だからさこの
relations. I do hope that if the
最
normal
初ジャニーさんかな思ったらさ
in France
高橋が
turns out to be
プロデュ
more
ーサー
than
そう思っ
successful, we might see new openings.
うるさかったうるさかった
Ukraine
この
remains the major stumbling
うる
block
さ
on
か
the
った
way to
みん
better
なさ
relations between Moscow
か
and
なと思っ
Brussels.
てなんか薬学長みたいなさ
At least some positive
俺みんな
dynamics
間
there.
違っ
It would be
て
easy to proceed on
ヤクザ
other
関係者に責任
issues
転嫁
where
無理ですよ
Russia and the European Union have common interests.
無理ですよさいいやろあ古賀誠一かなと思ったんよいや多分ね藤井裕二さんあなた当事者は知っててねはい山口勝平でした何山口勝平でしたなんだってよ今青鬼プロダクションねワンピースの件でさ
Well, here is what I think.
どうするかです
Of a European
思
army
いました
is actually a useful vision because it is good to know what the long-term goal might be.
どうす
But
るかって
is
言っ
the
た
European army something we can put
全場
together
面を
right
主張する
now?
かさ揉めましたさ
And why not?
主張するかさ田中真由美さんた
Because
ちさ
the European Union does
揉
not
めたそう
even
揉め
have
たん
the mechanism to come up with
揉め
clear
たんよ
political decisions
だ
and
そういう
to
ことで
speak
した
with one
俺
voice
間違って
in
スタ
crisis.
ートリンク
So the
見
first
てもうた
step
あ
which we in the
来て
European
たね
Union
さ
need to take together is to change
うわ
our decision-making
うわ
process. We need to go from consensus to qualified
あ
majority
最後
voting.
キュアコースのことはね上さんすみでまだ
That
と
all of us, whether we are 27 or 28, will only be
もう揉
listened
め
to,
た
will only be
もうびっ
respected,
くりした
and can only
まさ
be
か
military
20年の
actors
あの事件じゃ
with one voice, and that requires
多分
majority voting. So that's step number one. And the next steps are capabilities, and we will need to work on that
プロデュ
also.
ーサーたちを
And then we can
そう
think
かうにじさんの
of the long-term vision of a European army.
出て
I don't think anyone wins in trade conflicts, and even the wars
なんか細長
I
い
think a bit overstated
水網にそっく
because
りな
wars
この方
end
ね
up
足
being
よ
zero sum.
足
One
ましょう
wins,
さ
one loses.
しがみまいちゃんで
And
した
in the case of
しが
trade,
み
it
まいちゃん
should
で
be
さ
a win-win operation.
でさ
So I
ビ
think
ルダー
the,
バーグの
the
ね紹
analogy
介
is
者ね
mistaken, and
こ
by
こに載っ
closing
て
off your
る
own
か
markets, you
名簿
increase
ね
costs
実は
for your own people.
あんまり
In
鵜
the
呑みし
United
ないから
States, about
50% of the
残念ながら
imports
非
are
公開です。
commodities or intermediate goods. So if you raise those
私
costs,
三
it
極
makes
クーデ
costs
ター
for
知ったのさ、塩
manufacturers
崎さ
and
ん
consumers in the United States.
の
So
辞
the
任
same would be the case
引
in
退
Europe.
騒動で
And
揉
in
め
the
まし
case
た。
of the US and
あ
China,
れで
I
死に
think
ました
that
さ。
we're in a very dangerous situation. I think that there are many reasons and frustrations with China. Some of them are justifiable.
あれもですわ。あれもやった。
Property rights, reciprocity,
今回の事件も。
concerns about
あ
Chinese
私。
security and other
あ
policies.
れ
But I think you can find allies within
あと
China
日
on
大
other
事件も。
trade issues, and you actually want to try to
日大事件も揉めた。
both sides to a rules-based
あの
system.
田中秀俊
So
元
I
理事
think
長
that
たち
the
行って
path that we're on with China has led to more of confrontation. And in fact, what you're probably going to need to see is some
市場
combination
からそ
of
の安全保
competition,
障基本
cooperation,
あれ
and
出席した
confrontation, or at least drawing lines on some issues. So I think
してた
with a country as big as China, you need a more multifaceted
多
policy.
分今証言中やろ多分警察署で今証言中そう証言中証言中ですもう多分戻り場合によっては
I would say that the
保釈前後にそう言うやろ絶対そう
system
この場合
is that first of all we have a very
森友と柿みたいにあるじゃん
based on public funding
な
where
り
there
かねん
should
か
be
った
a
な
room for all.
加計学院
I think students are taught to think independently, a lot of critical thinking,
あれ
and
も賛成者って言ったら
quite a lot of
だから
creativity
私も
baked
出
into
席させてくれてきた
education. I
の
would especially commend
Ottilo
the
Martin
Finnish
Sten.
system where they
Iran.
have,
Oh.
where they put their
証言さ
best
せて
teachers
その
for
頃は
the
ね
youngest
あ
students.
青い時
And
の
they
弁護士が
use
連絡して
one
連絡してきたよ
preschool
そう
and
弁護
also
士がね
first to third grade to ensure that the children are best possibly equipped for
Yeah,
future
what was-
learning. And I believe that that's the
何
best
あ
investment
青い
you
家
can
さん
make
ね
is to
こっそ
invest
り
in the
加計
kids
学園
when
の
they're
言
really
及
young.
言及しましたそう言及したよ
For their future learning.
この後非公開で見ました証人かもね本人は一応ね松井一郎さんたちが言った一応の森のあ
Liberal democracy
籠池夫
can
妻は一応
survive
詐欺罪で
the current period of disruption,
いや
but it's
告
going
訴
to
した
have
って
to
それを
change
言いました
the
大阪地検特捜部
volatility
に提出しました
and the risks that we are witnessing across much of the Western world are anchored in some very deep changes that have been swirling beneath our democracies, that have been coming for many years and still have a long way to run. They relate to strong feelings of distrust in the political system, widespread fears over the perceived destruction of
二人がそう
national
仲介して
identity, big worries over
現像出席さ
deprivation, the way in which the economic settlement is playing out, and weakening bonds between the mainstream parties
喋って
and ordinary voters. Those four currents have been with us for a very long time, before the Great Recession, before the arrival of Facebook and Twitter and big tech, but they are now producing very substantive political effects, and they will continue to produce substantive political effects. So liberal democracy has to change. It has to make its political systems more representative. It has to ensure that people feel that their nations and communities are secure and have strong and robust external borders. And it also, over the long term, needs to devise an economic settlement that ensures that everybody feels that they are relatively getting the gains and the benefits that other groups of society are getting as well. Very big challenges, no clear answer as to
弁護だ
now.
なそう連絡じゃ
The ball is very
連
much
絡してん
in
の
liberal democracy's court.
あれいいみたい弁護士から言っときますから言っときますから言っときますから
So bringing trilateral to Slovenia means also bringing Slovenia to trilateral. And as you know, David Rockefeller Fellows had a free program. It is our pleasure that we connected them at the MCHM breakfast with Slovenian Business Society. They were talking about the global issues and how connected the world is, with some local representatives and even some members of trilateral. It is also our pleasure that the former Prime Minister, who is the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Miro Cerar, had the time to meet with them and discuss where the Europe is today and where the Europe is going. And of course, we have finished our program with amazing lunch with Professor Diana Zohar.
じゃあ、あれと思うと最悪。堀越学園の関係者呼ばれるんじゃないかさあ、なんか事件起こしたみたいな。見てびっくりさ、事件起こしたんだ。理事長含むメンツたち呼ばれるんじゃないかさあ。じゃないか。森友家系日大に次ぐ4番目の事件。
Has been changing too much, even the rather static nature of men.
でしたか。こういうことでした。ここでした。
Do you have a crystal ball? We're in the middle of a psychodrama in Britain, political and social, and it's very hard to predict how it will end up. Parliamentary drama, a drama inside the Conservative Party, and a drama in the country at large. I do not think it is certain that the British will leave the European Union.
Protectionism is never a good solution for trade, because in the long run it will endanger the competitiveness of everyone. The European car industry, whether you talk about OEMs or whether you talk about such suppliers, is very competitive, is export-oriented, is very successful on world markets, but most of the companies are not only delivering cars to other parts of the world, they are also producing cars in those parts of the world, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in China, whether it's Southeast Asia, where they have a lot of success. That means in the long run, free trade is always the better solution for economy and for the countries which want to safeguard jobs and prosperity.
A quantum leader is a new paradigm leader who realizes that the world is holistic. All things, all people, all problems are interconnected. There are no others. There is no separation. I am you, you are me. Thus, a quantum leader would say the problem of inequality very differently, or the problem of identity very differently, because we are not separate, atomistic, isolated individuals. And our problems are not separate, isolated, and animistic. A quantum leader is ethical, is moral, has compassion. A quantum leader is self-aware. A quantum leader celebrates diversity. A quantum leader asks fundamental questions, always questioning him or herself, questioning assumptions, questioning the way things have been done, questioning the norm, someone who lives at the edge of chaos, who shakes things up, who thrives on uncertainty, who thrives on chaos. A quantum leader is filled with compassion, and a quantum leader feels called to lead, called to serve. There's a sense of purpose, a sense of higher meaning in his or her leadership. A quantum leader is a servant leader. He exists to serve others and to serve the world, indeed to serve the universe.
simple answer to that, to the issue of asymmetric attacks on democracies. The point being that you can disrupt elections in democratic elections in a democratic country. It's rather difficult to do it with an authoritarian regime, since they really don't have genuine elections. And so what are you going to do when you are attacked? I think we need a broad range of responses, beginning with looking at our electoral systems to ensure that they are proportional, so you don't have the kind of issues you had in the U.S. presidential elections, where because of the electoral college system, some states had far more weight. I think we need to look at the kind of electoral systems we have and make sure that we get a broad representation rather than a simple binary decision of a first-past-the-post election system. We need to think about our asymmetric advantages. We have rule of law. That's pretty important. It's interesting, the authoritarian regimes all place their money abroad in places where there is rule of law. Why? Because in an authoritarian regime, you can just lose everything all at once. Someone takes your money. Whereas if it's in the West, or rather in a rule of law country, then that's unlikely. Well, maybe we can make it more difficult to keep your money here. Or we can be much more, we definitely should be much more transparent about ownership. After all, much of the money laundering that we've seen from the authoritarian states that are attacking us goes through anonymous shell companies. These are, again, issues that need to be taken up by government authorities in order ultimately to defend democracy.
Silicon Valley provides a unique ecosystem, basically in some sense a network of having a very strong university that's very applied, that is all about working with the real world, doing basic research and then trying to put that basic research into the society, into the good. An important thing, I think, is also that it's a social network of sharing. Is that basically in California there is no non-competes, so people move around freely, and this means that the flow of innovation is much faster. The other important thing is the size, the critical mass, again, of very large amounts of talent, so that companies can be scaled up very quickly. For example, in my own experience, I started working with Pinterest when there was less than 200 of us. 3 years later, there is a few thousand of us. And the company culture and everything wasn't lost, and the new people got hired. And then I think the last thing is that universities, as well as kind of companies, focus less on protecting their IP and really trying to move as fast as possible. Because if we think about innovation is about moving fast, and it's not so much about building walls and figuring out how to do the next step very carefully. It's really about running and iterating fast. And if we run and iterate fast, then the success will be there, and kind of little details don't matter that much. And I think this is important from the viewpoint of university, letting the research be put in the public domain and really benefit the environments in which the university's professors operate, as well as in terms of companies sharing the information and flow of people with each other. So there is, for example, in Silicon Valley, a lot of different seminars, people from one company visiting the other company, sharing quite openly actually what they are doing, writing academic papers, again talking about their latest solutions, so that we are all up to date, and the entire system can kind of help each other in terms of making the most innovation and the most progress in the short amount of time. Because I think the question is not can we innovate, but the question is, or can we invent something? But the question about innovation is, can we be the first ones to do something? So it's as much about the speed as it is about the substance.
good discussion today. Reviving the European dream is what we really want. The next year will be the election for the European Union, for the Parliament of the European Union, and it is really important that there will be a strong mandate. One of the challenges we are facing at the moment is still the migration crisis, and also the priority of the Austrian presidency is security and the fight against illegal migration. So we had a good discussion today on all these topics, and of course there are different opinions on this. But in general, we are always on the same line. We want to have a solution for the European Union and for Europe. Safe external borders and legal migration, because Europe will need it in the end. But people still have in front of their eyes the migration flood in 2015, and therefore it is really important to have a good solution, and a solution which will be implemented in all the countries of the European Union to have a resilient European asylum system.
Migration is currently one of the key issues of European citizens, and my view is that it will remain so, especially because migration is here to stay, and it will probably increase in numbers and complexity because of the political consequences of wars, the terrorism, but also because of the climate change. I think, in my view, migration is needed in Europe. I think it's something that we can benefit from, and I think that we need to change the narrative on this. First and foremost, us as politicians. Actually, the demographic of Europe says that migration is something that we will need in the future in order to maintain and grow our economic development, the quality of life. And I think that we should also go back to the European shared values and the human values that are, I think, the foundation stone of Europe, so that together we can change, as I said, the narrative and help these people, but also help ourselves grow and develop further. Thank you.
Turkey belongs to European family, you know. There is no way that Turkey can distance itself from the realities of Europe. Today, of course, at the Trilateral Commission, we are going to discuss three scenarios: confrontation, cooperation, and membership of Turkey to the EU. In these three scenarios, of course, there are different outcomes. What I would say that confrontation between Turkey and the EU is a complete lose-lose scenario. And if it is only cooperation instead of membership of Turkey to the EU, this will be some sort of limited cooperation, and it will be a scenario in which both Turkey and the EU will not be able to enjoy the full potential. In economics, we say, you know, this is not cost-effective at all. But when it comes to EU membership, I would say that this will mean full use of potential of Turkey and the EU together. This means a stronger, stable, respected, fully democratic Turkey, but this also means in the world scene a global actor of EU, peace-bringing EU, welfare-creating EU, employment-creating EU. So I would say that in this case, membership case, the outcome would be win, win, win. So win for Turkey, win for the EU, but also win for beyond.
You will have to define what you mean by Europe and the European Union having its own army. I do not think Europe needs its own army for what I would qualify as the classical Article 5 NATO scenario, in other words, in a conflict with Russia. But Europe should definitely, the European Union should definitely develop the possibility to project hard power without the United States of America. I can imagine a scenario in Northern Africa where you have a combination of terrorism, climate change, migration. It's an ungoverned part of Africa, largely, where Boko Haram meets Al-Qaeda, where Al-Qaeda meets Daesh. In other words, it's not impossible. Look at the French and what they did and are doing in Mali, that you would need to intervene militarily, and then the European Union would be on its own. Second scenario, virtual but not impossible, when in the Balkans the demons of the past would raise again. We should not repeat a situation like we had in the 90s of the previous century, where finally Bill Clinton and the United States of America had to come in to stabilize the situation. I could think about the need for border protection, external border protection, with military means. You're a bit on the border here between the military and the military police, the gendarmerie in French. In other words, if that is meant by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel with the European army, I can follow them. What we should not forget, by the way, is when you talk about European military intervention, that's why I like the qualification European army not much, is that there will always be national parliaments who will decide if those soldiers will be sent into harm's way. So they will not, I hope, talk about a European command and a European parliament which decides this goes to the heart of the sovereignty of nations, and those nations will want to decide themselves. I see the way out as presented by President Macron of France, the European Intervention Initiative, where you can build coalitions of the willing outside the EU institutions. You can build coalitions of the willing, which you will always need for such kind of military operations. Advantage of a coalition of the willing is that after Brexit you can keep Great Britain on board, because they will not anymore be a member of the European Union. At the same time, PESCO, the Permanent Structures Cooperation, should of course continue, important project, but rather bureaucratic and rather cumbersome. So that would be my answer to the question, does Europe need its own army?
What can we do in order for democracy to survive? So I would like that to be the main theme for our conversation, and I can simply leave it with that and ask you, so what does it take and what can we do?
Well, I should tell you first what I've been talking to people about. So, my wife and I have been on a 100-city tour since January, and I've spoken to about 250,000 people over the course of that, in Australia, New Zealand, and throughout the US and Canada, and some in Europe, mostly in the UK and the Scandinavian countries. I'm coming back here in March and April to go through the South and the East. When I speak to audiences, I always watch people one by one, because I never speak to the crowd. And I always listen to the entire audience, because what I'm trying to manage when I'm speaking is to put everybody in the same place so that there's dead silence. Because if there's dead silence, that means that everybody's concentrating on the same thing, and that everybody has come to a collective agreement that that thing is of substantive importance. And the most reliable means of silencing an audience of 2,500 people, regardless of where that is around the world, is to make a strong case for the relationship between suffering, meaning, and responsibility. And the case for suffering, I think, is quite obvious, because one of the things that I point out to my listeners is not even the existence of the individual rights that are part of the substructure of democratic society, but the willingness to accept voluntary responsibility for those preconditions and then working to rectify them. And the corollary of that is that it's almost inevitably the case that people find the meaning that sustains themselves through suffering and that enables them to be motivated sufficiently to constrain their own malevolence is to be found in the adoption of responsibility. And it's surprising that a message that has that much weight, let's say, and that little frivolity, because there's no frivolity, let's say, in that, silences people. Can democracy survive? Well, first of all, if you ask the typical person in a democratic society whether they would like it to survive, the resounding answer to that is going to be yes. The people who are working to undermine it are a tiny radical fringe on both ends of the political distribution, let's say, with a disproportionate amount of exposure and power. And the people in the middle are lost in some sense without a uniting narrative. And a huge part of the narrative that has united democratic countries since their foundation isn't the doctrine of rights. And it's not the doctrine of individual happiness. It's the doctrine that the individual is the sovereign foundation of the polity and maybe of the cosmos itself, which is something that I happen to believe, given the important role that consciousness plays in existence itself, and that it's useful and necessary to call to people to remind them of their responsibility as sovereign individuals. And so I'm encouraging people to develop a vision for their life, to adopt full responsibility for themselves in a manner, and not in a manner that pertains specifically to their narrow self-interest or happiness, but to something that's much broader in scope, to think that each person should take on the voluntary requirement to take care of themselves, but also their future selves, because each of us is a collective that stretches across time, and whatever you do impulsively in the present merely means that you sacrifice yourself in the future, and that's not a sustainable or intelligent solution. And you want to take on responsibility for yourself and your future selves in a way that's of maximal benefit to your family, if you can manage that. And then perhaps if there's something left over in terms of your capability, then you can do both of those things in a way that maximally supports and serves the community. And for many young people, that's something they've never heard, is that we've made a very bad case all of us, I would say, that each of these people, each person, has that sovereign responsibility, and that if they adopt it, that actually constitutes something of singular importance. And that's an old religious idea, in some sense, that each person has a soul, let's say, that is somehow a center of reality itself, and that needs to be manifested in life itself, and that if it isn't manifested, then something of tremendous value is not brought forward, and worse, and this is the end of the case, let's say, and worse, to the degree that that's not brought forward, then something hellish moves in to take its place. And people understand this sort of thing a lot more clearly than you might think if you explain it to them as if they might understand. And then it gives them a series of purposeness that straightens out their life. And so my sense is the way that you revivify democracy is by remembering its fundamental insistence that the individual is at the cornerstone of the state, and that everything you can possibly do to fortify the individual, simultaneously, the individual is the eyes of the state, is is that the living individual is the eyes of the dead state, and the living individual revivifies the state. And to the degree that we forget our concentration on the sovereignty of the individual, right, the divine sovereignty of the individual for that matter, then we undermine the foundation on which democracy is based. And then people look for alternatives. They search for meaning elsewhere in extremist movements of one form or another, or they collapse into a kind of nihilism that's completely counterproductive. And so, well, so that's been my experience.
So this morning we had a session on the future of mobility, and we actually discussed what does it mean for the auto industry and what does it mean for the cities. If you look at the auto industry, there has never been as much change as there is today. On the technology side, with connectivity, electrification, autonomous driving, on the social domain, with sharing, more urbanization and new ways of working, and also on the regulation side, where it's about emission control and standards, and also on regulation for managing congestions in the city. So we actually covered that. We also talked about what does it actually mean for the cities? How will actually the traffic evolve if you have more AVs and individual mobility through AVs? What would be levers to actually work on getting a mitigation on traffic, and basically how to deal with heightened traffic from autonomous vehicles? What would be the impact of actually sharing more cars, of basically having smaller or basically bus-based autonomous vehicles, and actually how would you deal with occupancy-based pricing? How would you actually work as a city to make the whole modal mix work, and in the end get to a better transportation for the whole city?
Conversation yesterday in the dinner with Nigel Higgins on, I would say, the crisis, the causes of the great financial crisis, and whether or not we are in a situation where we could expect new major difficulty, taking into account what we have done since the crisis that erupted in 2007-2008. I have to say that the questions which were asked by Nigel were very, very stimulating. I could embark on explaining that, in my opinion, it was very much a multi-dimensional causes that we had to cope with. We had certainly the over-indebtedness that had accumulated from year 2000 up to 2007-2008, approximately 25% of the global GDP as an additional public and private debt outstanding. That was a major cause. Another cause was the new emerging properties of the new global finance system with the impact of technology, new IT technologies, and globalization. And amongst the properties, the emerging properties that I could witness myself when I was president of the ECB in 07, 08, 09, 10, 11, was that the contagion was taking place extraordinarily rapidly. You know, in the old times, you would expect that a major shock here would be transmitted to the rest of the world as a matter of months or even quarters. In the new world in which we are, it's a matter of half days. And we could experience that in 08, dramatically, obviously, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And we have other causes that are also important because, as I said, it's multidimensional. But I stress that the two causes that I mentioned just now, namely these emerging properties and the rapidity of contagion on the one hand, and the debt overburdening the global economy are still there. And we, particularly as regards the level of the debt outstanding, public and private, as a proportion of global GDP, we continue to have a piling up of debt more or less at the same pace after the crisis as before the crisis. And this is worrying, and it calls for extreme vigilance, obviously, and hard work to complete all what we have done and should do, again, to prevent the new crisis, and if we have new shocks that are very difficult to predict, to prove resilience in the new environment which we will have to accept, because we have a recession in the US and in Europe, or because we have geostrategic events that would be very, very shocking at the global level, or for any other reason. That's what we discussed.
Strategic mission for Europe has to care on the globalized world. That means to stabilize our neighborship, to stabilize Africa together with others, but Africa is one of the major challenges for Europe as well. And of course, to make our European values as attractive as possible in the global competition, which order is the better one.
Some people wonder why best practices in government haven't spread faster amongst the democracies. When you see, for example, that New Zealand has solved the problem of public finance, why doesn't everybody copy it? Why doesn't everybody copy the way that the South Koreans teach their kids mathematics? Why doesn't everybody copy the way the Swiss decentralize their politics? And I think part of the answer is that we don't really spend nearly enough time looking at what is best practice. I live in the United States, though I grew up in the United Kingdom. One hardly ever hears a reference to other countries' systems in the US debate on healthcare, except when somebody is making a completely caricatured analysis of the way, say, Canada does things. So I think part of what we need to do is stress the need to look at best practice so that politicians and voters become more aware that there are solutions to most of the public policy problems. We just haven't tried them in many countries. On the other hand, I think there's one other side to this that one shouldn't forget. Sometimes you'll meet people who'll tell you, well, the Scandinavians have worked everything out, and Sweden or Finland or Denmark has come up with the perfect solution to policy problems. That's often an argument people make on the left in the United States. But I don't think the solutions that the Swedes came up with in recent decades necessarily would work in a country as large and as diverse as the United States. So let's look at best practice, let's understand which systems deliver the best results, but let's not pretend that one size is going to fit all. Part of the reason for the success of Western civilization, which is where democracy began, was the diversity of systems and the competition between them.
I recently read that information is now the world's most consequential and contested geopolitical resource. I think that's right. Global internet penetration has revolutionized the information domain, and information operations, which aren't new, are dramatically expanding in scale and scope. This is a new challenge for media organizations, which are already facing a business model crisis and declining trust. Meanwhile, AI advances confer strategic advantage to those with access to lots of data. This has implications for privacy, but also for the information advantage that democracies have traditionally enjoyed.
does European diplomacy exist? It's not an easy question, and the answer is yes and no. Yes, in an institutional sense, that is, Mrs. Mogherini today exists, she travels, she can deliver some messages for Europe, but I would say certainly not on the most fundamental issues of foreign policy, because the members of the European Union are, many of them, very old nation states. They have their own foreign policy, defense, security apparatus, and so forth and so on. And I cannot imagine the French diplomacy just to be second to the European diplomacy, and the same with the UK, as long as the UK is in the EU, or the German diplomacy, and I could continue the list. So, in my judgment, the best merit of the EU diplomacy is first to perhaps reduce as much as possible the differences between the various diplomacies of the member states. And this, as such, is not so bad. And also, I think the EU diplomacy can deal with some relatively secondary issues, such as, for instance, I'm thinking of the Timor case in Indonesia, that is, issues which are not at the forefront of national diplomacies, but which nevertheless can have some importance. So, to conclude, I would say that the real European diplomacy will exist only the day when the Europeans have a clear understanding of what they want to achieve, what is the identity of the European Union still to be built, because diplomacy, like defense, has to do with the protecting the identity of a political unit. And I think we have not yet reached the stage when we are able to answer this question: what is our identity, and what is it exactly that we want to protect?
They're certainly similar in one respect, that Thucydides wrote about brilliantly in his book on the Peloponnesian War, that when a rising power, as Thucydides wrote about Athens, threatens to displace a ruling power, like Sparta, or in the current situation, a rising China threatens to displace a ruling US, alarm bells should sound, grave danger ahead, a significant likelihood of war, real bloody war.
China's rise will change the international configuration from the unipolar to bipolar, and also possibly make the world order and different from before. But it doesn't mean that the China's rise is the only factor to change the current international order. And actually, the Trump administration's policy is more challenging than China's rise to the current international order, because China's policy tries to maintain the order. The reason is very obvious. China benefits from the present order, and meanwhile, the Trump administration believes, and China benefits more from the current order than the United States. That's why they want to change the order, and based on the ideology of anti-establishmentism. So from my understanding, if we're talking about what the ideology and challenging the current international order or the liberalist order, is the anti-establishmentism in US and the populism in the Europe.
think in economic terms, it's already shaping up to be the Chinese century. By 2014, according to the IMF, China was the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity, and in other respects, China is already the world's largest manufacturer, the world's largest exporter, the world's largest market for a great many important commodities such as vehicles. The question is whether that economic power translates into political power and strategic power, because I think most people would agree, probably even in Beijing, that America remains the world's dominant political power. And the question is, will that economic mismatch between economic power and strategic power change, and China will become the dominant power, not just economically, but politically? It's too soon to tell that, however, on that, because there are a lot of different variables. Will there be a direct conflict between China and the US, for example, over dominance of the Pacific? Will China perhaps be constrained by other things? Maybe there'll be internal disruption to China's politics if it cannot manage to, for example, maintain the current political stability. That could disrupt China's political rise. And finally, there's the question of the rest of the world, because between them, China and the US are not the whole world economy. Other major powers will have a say in this. And at the moment, it looks like most of the other major powers of the world, Japan, the European Union, are closer to the United States than to China. So there's a question whether China, even as the world's largest economy, can become the dominant political power without allies.
I think economic growth, the success or failure of it, will be determined by the degree to which individual countries and regions can supply jobs for the great emerging middle classes of these countries, formerly poor countries. I think what we're likely to see in the 21st century is many people who are either liberated from hard labor, or for whom there is too little hard labor to provide jobs. And what will these people do? How will they be employed? And I think that will be a major factor forward. Also, even though the world population is declining, we're still in an era of massive male youth bulges in about 20 or 30 countries. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to provide jobs for people, whether it's in China, in Yemen, in Ethiopia, or wherever.
やっぱりね、レロンス事務総長サムコでね、福島明宏と申しますね。まさかビルダーバーグにびっくりでしたね。
The main question of my talk
多分
is
おそらく
if robotics and artificial intelligence and the upcoming industrial revolution
もし
are a
かして
threat or an opportunity for the world and for manufacturing countries and also for developing countries. And the answer is still unknown, but what is sure now is that we have to invest in the main assets that are characterizing the industrial revolution, the digital transformation, competences, infrastructures, data centers, and all the tools that are fundamental and are considered enabling technologies for the future digital transformation. I also presented the differences between the US, Europe, and China, how they are integrating artificial intelligence into different knowledge and competences and scientific results. For example, in the US, they are investing very much in developing artificial intelligence for humanities, while in China they are investing in developing artificial intelligence for agricultural application, for producing food, for example. So globalization has
obtained some results in terms of being socially connected, but in terms of geopolitics, we still see many differences in also in how the digital transformation is implemented in the society. Then I spoke about robotics and how the journey of robotics is coming into mass, because robotics was developed for manufacturing countries, for industrial production, and robots are in manufacturing plants. But in recent years, what we have seen is the development of service robotics, which is intended to support services and the offer of services in terms of medical robotics, social robotics, educational robotics. And now what is happening is that robotics is coming into our houses by producing some consumer products and also producing changes in the society in terms of supporting autonomous drive or different products that are revolutionizing business and revolutionizing our lives.
'We do have a very serious problem of people left behind. The global agenda talks about eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, having every child in primary and secondary education. We're off track to achieve these things. And that means not just a few people left behind, it means literally hundreds of millions of people missing out. Take education. More than 250 million children, adolescents and youth not in school as we speak. How can those children in the future really contribute to a knowledge economy and provide the most basic access to education? So it is time for the international community to get a grip on the reality of what is happening. If we want a world that is well fed, people don't live in extreme poverty, where education is a right, not a privilege, we have a lot to do. International development assistance is important, critical for the lowest income countries. For other countries to be prioritising their budget so that their growth is inclusive and sustainable is critical. There are solutions. What's needed is the political will to activate and implement those solutions.
だけ本当にはいローマクラブでしたはいこれ
There are more than 70 million people in the world that are forcibly displaced from their homes, either as refugees crossing borders or displaced in their own country because of war, violence, discrimination, persecution, bad governance. Why is that? The world has become a difficult place where to make peace. We have become unable to make peace and to build peace. So that's the first thing that we need to look at if we want to reduce this global refugee crisis. Meanwhile, what is very important to remember is that 85% of those 70 million people are not in the rich world. They are in poor countries or middle-income countries. So the effort and the new effort, not just humanitarian, but long-term effort founded on sound development, both for refugees and for host communities, has to focus on those countries. We have now a global compact on refugees. We will have the first ever global refugee forum in December this year in Geneva. These are opportunities to rally broader coalitions of actors, not just states and the United Nations, but also the private sector, the business community, civil society, academia, to forge new ways to respond to the global refugee crisis and to finally address strategically its root causes.
意外だスマートフォンの規約の関係で
The question that you're raising, will Syria find a long-lasting peace? Well, the Syrian people deserve a long-lasting peace. Think about it. They've been 8 years now
選挙。あの渡辺美来た。
regional and frankly international. So the answer is it must be yes. Now how to do it is where the challenge is coming. And the only way to do it is actually to end the military conflict because there is no solution. I mean, it's not just a word, it's the truth. There will never be just a military solution and include everyone. New constitution, elections under the UN supervision, that would be a way to include it.
これか。これクリンゲで。これしようか皆さん。ベルンハンド元大愛オランダ国防総省、ネダーランド国防総省が作ったそうベルズとロクセンブルクまたはビルダーバーグでしたね。ビルダーバーグです。ちなみにここも3件ボイコットはでした。ボイコットはでした。
Multilateralism is under threat at the moment, and I think that we have to make every effort to rejuvenate it, adapt it, and make sure that it continues to help govern, particularly the economic developments around the world.
ジョコウィド元大統領がインドネシア大使館に寒いことは皆さん福島明宏ともしかしてこれに出席してた。
Mechanisms, and that is really the consequences of climate change. I believe that many of the issues that we are debating at the moment will mean absolutely nothing in 20 years' time if we have not acted now in order to make sure that the planet remains something that is hospitable for our children and grandchildren. And my third message, which will not surprise any of those who know me or my friends, will have to do with inequality, and in particular the inequality that women have to suffer for a long time. And while inequality as such is a major disruption, I believe that by addressing women's situation and the inequality that they face, it will help quite a way. So we'll try to do that tonight.
プラットフォームまだそれでトロールプログラムで現地ディスカッションディスカッションインターナショナルインジューション
We're living through an era of rapid and disruptive change. That's across the board, economy, society, and what we're seeing is that nowhere is that disruption more evident than the trends associated with climate change. We're all familiar with the extreme events, the temperature rises, and the inexorable change that we're seeing in the planet's ecology as a result of climate change. But a major part of that discussion is how does energy transition and decarbonization of our energy system, which accounts for about 2/3 of carbon emissions, how will that impact climate change, and can we enter an energy transition era rapidly enough to mitigate carbon that will take us to a safe future?
この件に強制連行だから誰と藤村こういう巡査部長だしねここに来た時さそう張り込んでたんじゃないかって言ったよさいやお前の件今回初めて前がそう張り込んでたんじゃないかさ全域に張り込んでたんじゃないかさ大勢来ました10名近く退去してくるほど問題やったさほとんど来たよさ実は赤坂正面ですね俺こっそり来ました来てたよ数十名ほど俺相当覚悟あったらしいわ本当の
Carbon economy should come because to avoid the climate change, serious, would say, effort is necessary. Many of the governments are trying the new technologies, new regulations,
やっぱりシリアのアルアサドしかもやっぱり出席してたビルドバーグに今こっちが3国に変わるnew technology,
technologies about renewables or carbon-related technologies, efficiency in a difficult sector in the industry, and the new regulations. So we need really double or triple our efforts to make it happen. One of the areas which IA focused on is hydrogen. Hydrogen can be used to store the electricity generated by wind or solar, which is very volatile, and storage is the key element. So battery may not necessarily be enough, so hydrogen can be used. And also hydrogen can be used for steel, cement, some of the industries where the decarbonization is very difficult. So that's another area. The third one will be the hydrogen could be the new transformation for the sectors of the oil or gas producing country. If they can remove carbon dioxide from oil or gas or coal, then these hydrocarbon change into the very friendly, climate-friendly resources. So this may prevent the hydrocarbon as a stranded asset. So maybe the hydrogen is one of the key areas. We need lots of infrastructure building technologies are necessary, but hydrogen may give us a good chance to achieve a sustainable future.
別の事案できました。だね。来ました。意外と日本独自の外交やってるよ。あら、日本独自の外交やってるよ。そう。
Because by definition, any disinformation narrative doesn't have good facts. They make their facts up. They're actually lying. This is why it's disinformation. So the challenge with disinformation actors is that the thing they have in common is they're really good storytellers. They tell a story. A lot of the time they will appeal to anger, they'll appeal to fear, they'll appeal to hatred, and they will try and stop people thinking. They'll try and get people so enraged that they switch off their critical faculty. That means that for those of us who are trying to challenge these narratives on a daily basis, it's a much more complex challenge than just presenting the facts. You have to have the ability to tell a story, and you have to find an emotion to appeal to, which will actually get people to think. Now, fortunately, there is a model of story which works. If you think of the Independent story, that's a story where you're putting together evidence and you're telling people this is what happened, this is why it happened, and it appeals to a different sort of emotion. It appeals to curiosity, it appeals to problem solving, and so a lot of the challenge of dealing with disinformation is presenting the story of how the disinformation was created, how was the trick done, and you can lead people on the story and you can show them this person is telling you that here is a video of somebody attacking a voter at a polling station yesterday, but actually look, this video showed up on CNN 4 years ago in a different context. You can share that voyage of discovery with the person you're talking with, and then they will realize how the trick was done, but it will also sensitize them that the next time around they'll be looking for that same trick. If you teach people very simple skills like searching for a photo online or searching for a video online, you can actually make them proof against that kind of reused content and repackaged content, not just today, but every time this kind of thing comes up. And so really dealing with disinformation, you have to have the facts, but you have to teach the skills as well. You have to give people the ability to solve the problems for themselves, because then you'll be appealing to their curiosity, you'll be appealing to their problem-solving senses, and you'll be appealing to their sense of pride in actually exposing the story in the first place. And those are the kind of emotions which will then counter the anger and the fear and the hatred that disinformation actors try to target.
Cities are one of the greatest innovations of all times, and what's interesting right now is that urbanization is, alongside with digitalization,
very, very strong economic force and force for innovation as more and more people move into cities and metro areas. And urban areas were important during the industrial era, but they are increasingly important in a knowledge-based economy. And what's interesting, especially for a person like me who comes from a small city like Stockholm, is that there seemed to be room for cities outside the megacities as well. There are some really interesting drivers of innovation that are smaller or mid-sized cities, amongst which Stockholm is actually one, but there are a number of examples. And what is important if a city wants to become an outlier or a hub for innovation is collaboration. If you look at urban innovation especially, you need to have a strong public-private partnership. The mayor needs to gather people from private sector, from academia and other stakeholders around the table and work together to solve problems. And I think we see that to a quite large extent right now, and I hope we'll see more of it going forward.
So we had, I have to say, a global meeting with three North American, Asian Pacific and European members of the Trilateral Commission, which was very, very multidimensional, if I may. Multidimensional in the great tradition of the Trilateral Commission by the, I would say, experiences of the members, by the sensitivities of the members, by the fact that it was, of course, a non-partisan, multi-sensitivities meeting, also because the issues that we addressed were very, very multidimensional in all respect. We addressed issues that were of a geostrategic nature, issues that were of an economic nature, profoundly economic nature, issues that were related to environmental issues and difficulties and challenges. And we addressed also these particular challenges for our societies that populism, so-called populism, represent, which is also a largely multidimensional issue. So I think it was really trilateral at its best, and also it was the occasion to confirm some dimensions and orientations of the trilateral and to make new experience, to reinforce in a number of domains our, I would say, franchise as the Trilateral Commission. First, let me mention that the trilateral is called trilateral because there is not only the new hemisphere, the US, Mexico, Canada, but also Europe and also Asia. And of course, the role of Asia at a global level is more and more important. As regards new dimension for the Trilateral Commission, not only we confirmed our own values, democratic values, rule of law, human rights, and all what goes with a democratic society, but we also reinforce and confirmed our values as regards multilateralism, international cooperation, in the best sense of the term. We also said that we would like to be more transparent than we were before at the level of the trilateral as a whole, with a new initiative that we took, in particular the idea of having the display of video to sum up some of the issues that we would have addressed, and also with the idea of making known at the level of the Trilateral Commission all publications, articles, interventions, books that would be displayed or published by the members of the Trilateral Commission. All this, of course, as part of transparency and also as part of being more influential if it is possible. We also have given a mandate to the three chairs to see in which direction we could be more proactive in terms of communication, display of our ideas through various forms. So this is something which we considered very important and is one of the major conclusions of the Trilateral Commission which took place in Paris.
Sullivan. I am the new chair of the North America group of the Trilateral Commission. I wanted to take this opportunity to say a few words about the Commission and about our future. As you may know, the Trilateral Commission is a storied institution, an organization with 46 years of history of having an impact on big ideas, on bringing people together across different sectors and across three different geographies, that of North America, Europe, and Asia. But we are on the cusp of a new chapter, one that builds on that history, but really reorients ourselves and puts us in a position to make an impact in a very, very different world. And the reason why I have such confidence that the Commission can remake itself is because there is a need, and the Commission is well suited to meet that need. And that need is quite simply that in this day and age, in these political landscapes, the need is simply for more organizations, more individuals, more entities to take up the mantle of defending a rules-based order, an order that values and is committed to democratic principles, ideas like free trade and human rights. And we also have a need for more ideas to help us tackle new challenges, or certainly challenges that are new to this generation. And there are many reasons why I think the Trilateral Organization is so well poised to meet this need. First and foremost, we are an organization that at its heart is a community of countries that share a common set of values, that share these commitments to these ideas about democracy, about free markets, about the rule of law. And secondly, we have a membership that spans policy, business, and academia and media. And that allows us to bring minds together in experience to bear on problems that are no longer just the purview of one of those sectors. The things that need to be thought about today and where we need new solutions and prescriptions are ones that are at the intersection of business and policy, whether it is the contributions that private sector organizations can make to combating climate change, whether it is figuring out the ideas that will drive the reform of capitalism, or whether it is understanding the impact of technology on our systems. All of these things need business, government, and others at the table to help with. Now, of course, to realize this potential for the Trilateral Organization to meet this need, we are going to have to do some things differently than we have in the past. First and foremost, we are going to have to recognize, as a group primarily of democracies, we need to spend some time looking at ourselves, looking internally, saying what's happening with our own institutions, what is the health of our own institutions, and how is that situation affecting our ability to cooperate across national lines and deliver global problems to pressing global solutions. So we're spending more time talking about things like populism and the impact of technology on our own societies. Secondly, we've got to think about impact differently. Traditionally, we're an organization that has had impact based on the very nature of our relationships. We're an organization of people who have close ties to national governments, and often the ideas that we debate in private inform our own perspectives and inform our discussions and deliberations and conversations with people in positions of power. That will still be true, but today we need to think about having an impact on the broader debate. We no longer live in a world where governments are the only ones that can influence the future. In fact, increasingly, we have to think about other entities as being the real engines of change, and be that corporations or universities or even individuals. We need to think about how to shape the conversation, how to bring those groups in, to have investment in, and commitment to solutions, and we need to move ahead ahead whether or not we're able to get our governments to agree with our prescriptions and recommendations. So in short, it's a really exciting time to be part of the Trilateral Commission. I'm deeply honored to be the new chair of the North America Group, and I look forward to working with all our members and my colleagues from other regions to realize this vision. Thank you.
The role of political parties in the political processes of countries has been always to A, intermediate the demands of society, and second, to organize the process of political competition to mobilize the population for access to power. The first objective, the one of intermediation, has been badly eroded by technology, by the social media, because people have direct access to the politicians, to society in general, to make their demands directly to the people. However, nothing has replaced the means to access to power. And the problem that societies in the world all over are facing these days have to do essentially with the fact that governments have been unable to perform well. So I believe that the real problem is not political parties, but the lack of ability of governments to deliver in poor conditions. The governments have been unable to deliver for very obvious reasons. First of all, because it's much more difficult to govern in the era of ubiquitous information, because governments no longer have control of the sources of information, because they compete for information and for communications with the people in general. So the real problem is not political parties. The real problem is that societies in the world are lacking legitimacy. It's interesting to watch that there are a few governments in the world that know how to govern and have succeeded in maintaining the legitimacy of their systems. In those countries, the political parties are not losing faith. So the real issue for the looking forward is to create conditions for the people to have access to the political process without undermining the legitimacy of societies. And that's not something easy to accomplish. It'll take a dramatic effort of leadership,
これで撮影時間が短くなってもだ。俺らゴジラオタクと恨んでたな。めっちゃ恨んでたな。富山省吾さん、デビュー作初めて失敗した。失敗しました。失敗してもたん、富山さん。それ以来滋賀県での撮影はやめますって言いました。お返しに93 DMG へ仕返ししました。大津通過版やりました。お返し二度と撮影に来ない。なぜならガメラ作品でバルゴン対決した。あの大津のあたりダイアンさん、これを再現しようと思った。あそこでビオラン戦わせダイアン、これで終わろうと思った。
The best way for companies to surf the digital revolution is to build trust with their customers and to build trust with their employees. One of the ways in which companies can do that is to have frank conversations with the workforce, to sit down with workers and their unions and to say, look, here's the challenges that we're facing. But importantly to ask them, how can we best get there? Because all too often, a lot of the solutions that a company can put in place that will make a real difference, the employees know the answer to that.
知ってました、最初から。最初から知ってました。わかった。
Multilateralism is not only the best, in many cases the only way in which you can deal with global issues, because we're dealing with global challenges and therefore you need global solutions, you need multilateral solutions.
一応皆さん NGO です。NGO ですよ。
But once you get it, then they will stick around for longer and you will get greater ownership tend to have
これが
more
CCI
effective solutions. The other
と
way
ね、そう
is
セイ
that,
ワールド、
of course,
メンツが集まってる
you know,
会ね、まあ、協
unilateralism
議会みたい
is always about who is stronger in a bilateral relationship. And therefore, by going multilateral, what you do is you
な。NATO
balance,
あ
and all the opinions count. Of course, you always have the bigger countries speak louder, but the differences are less. And also, the needs of the smaller countries, the needs of the developing countries,
それはこういう巡査部長たち、もし
in a
かして
society that are left behind,
まさか
then
やっ
they
ぱ
are
り
much better addressed by
ムスリム裁判あったか。
So yes, today we need multilateral more than ever before.
裁判あったか。
We have just concluded the meeting here in Stockholm of the European section of the Trilateral Commission. I think it's been a great meeting. I think we've been able to have a dialogue on a lot of the issues that are of concern.
ただ私もちょっと気になったんよさ。アメリカでも異変があったみたい。なんかおかしいなと思った。藤井裕二さん知ってたはずや。そう知ってたはずや。そうあんまり知ってたよ。
So virtually all of the issues that are topic of concern to us Europeans at the moment have been on the agenda during the particular 2 days in Stockholm. And then I think we have enjoyed the company of this very diverse and very interesting group that is the Trilateral Commission.
そうゆうさんこっそりそう言ったよ。そう今第二の滋賀県はなんか作ろうかってそう言ったよ。今国投資してて。
I suppose the question we're all asking is, will the Brexit saga ever end? After 3 years after the referendum, and the British still haven't decided what they want to do, and they're now in an election. I suppose that the answer to the question depends on who wins the election. In order to try and answer that question, you have David Lidington, who was Mrs May's number 2 in the last government, and who chose not to serve under Mr Johnson, the current Prime Minister, and he's going to tell us who's going to win the election and whether that's going to bring things to an end. And I'm going to disagree with whatever he says.
Technology is not a threat to democracy. I believe that technology can enable our democratic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and really freedom of information so that we can make smart decisions about how and where we want to take the future of our countries. I think we have to be mindful of how the technology can be used against us and educate our citizens about those risks. But I think that technology truly is an enabler of our society and that we should continue to embrace it, not refrain from it.
To some extent, the school of the future for the adult workforce will essentially not be a school. Many people will have to continue to learn, continue to reskill, continue to upskill, but they'll do that inside their workplace. We will need to ensure that at least 2 to 3 months of learning are integrated into every single year that somebody is at work. The second thing that we know is that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is changing workplaces and the needs of the labor force so quickly that we're also going to need to quite fundamentally reform education systems. And that applies to the delivery and it also applies to the content. One, we need much more technology integrated into schools. And second, we need to ensure that young children are understanding how to apply these technologies in the future, understanding how to collaborate with each other rather than compete with each other, and understand how to apply critical thinking so that they're able to continue to learn throughout their life course.
have so many unicorns up here in Nordic countries, and I think especially if you look at Sweden and Finland, Estonia, of course, in a class of its own. I think that it starts with fantastic education. We really have a foundation of education here in Nordic countries that doesn't kill initiative, doesn't kill creativity.
まあそういうことでした皆さんさあびっくりしたなやっぱりなみんなそうめんがさびっくりした本当にまさかこことこだまのびっくりしたこだまのごめんかすれもビルダーバーに行ってました
It's definitely going to be cold, dark, there's going to be slush on the ground. So it's very clear that it's not the Silicon Valley. It's much, much better. And it's much, much better because it's different. We have 2,400 volunteers from more than 60 countries that build this fantastic event called Slush. And it's really the young people, they're volunteering, they're there doing and making that happen because they want to be there, they love to be there, not because somebody told them that, please do this, please do that, but they're there because they want to be entrepreneurs, they want to make things happen. And they build this event for a few years, the best and biggest on the planet, and after that they go out and they build fantastic startups. So I think that the whole Nordic model is about enabling people to do things and giving the people, the young people and all of us the skills needed to be successful. Fantastic safety net. So we all know that when you try to do new things, more often than not,
多分森田明夫ねなんで3局にいつもあ児玉の事案で呼ばれてる呼ばれてるなんて言ってんの呼ばれてました私も架空でソニーの会社役員たち架空やけどソニーの会社役員たち今
and they have 4 unicorns, Playtex, Skype, TransferWise, and now the latest one being bought. 1.3 million people, 4 unicorns, that's more than 10% of all the unicorns in Europe actually. So the rest of Europe needs to get its act together. And then I think that if you look at this unicorn per capita, in China they have more unicorns than anywhere else, 200, but they also have more people, 1.4 billion people. So if you do the math, in China, you need 7 million Chinese people to build just one unicorn company. While in Estonia, they're much more efficient, only roughly 3,000 people you need to build one unicorn. So that's something that we should all be more like Estonia. And that's something that we can definitely strive to here in Europe. So let's go out there and do things, and we'll end up with lots of new unicorns all over Europe.
慎太郎の件で申し訳でもびっくりしました私も尊敬する先生がさ
For us in the European roundtable, which gathers the 55 largest companies, most important companies in Europe, Europe's competitiveness is absolutely key. The world is changing. We see lesser of continued work for free trade, more protectionism growing in both East and West. And we as companies, we realize that we will not be long-term successful unless Europe is successful. And there are a few challenges that really stick out here. First, it's digitalization. The world is becoming digital through artificial intelligence and through the rollouts of 5G. This opens up for huge opportunities in every single part of society. But Europe is lagging behind here. We need to speed up and we need to invest more and do more. Then we have the Green Deal. Europe is in the lead in this. And this is an area where we can take advantage. business opportunities.
加藤派のメンズたち。
That's an area where we also have to come together. And of course, in free trade or free trade under European rules, and this is now a threat.
野中宏文さんと小泉純一郎さんが当時やってたあれ総理総裁分離論やりました。やってみました。やってみたら結構効率が良かった。これで小泉純一郎さんは思ったよりのところが本人がごめん独裁につながるからやめた。独裁につながるからやめた。やめました。要はこういう意味なんか気づかなかった菅義偉さんというのはお二人ともごめん佐藤栄作先生のお弟子さんでした。お弟子さんでした。さあ小沢一郎さんとの党首討論みんなびっくりしちゃいそう笑顔で性的同士がさあ小沢さんって言ってた。びっくりした。さあごめんあれ三極クーデターや待機クーデターやってた。大泉さんね、なんで岸信介に言及したんですか。ごめん福田先生ね、まあ政治的ハラスメント食らったけど、それね今の平和政策研究会結成したって言ってました。多分言ったよな、質問受けたらすいません、お前岸信介に言及しないでくれ。知らないです。嫌ってますか。全然言及しないの。言及しないとか。言及しないとか。要はね、小泉さんね、ヒデさんのために首相になりました。圧力がむちゃくちゃ出ました。マジか。安倍晋三ね、国政保守とは。麻生太郎さんと。逆に言うとテレビ東京のね、そうびっくりした TX。そうなんか真ん中に立っててびっくりした。そうごめんなさい。もうあれ大近い元は私無関係ですって言った。すいません。この2人ちょっとやめろって言った。もうやめろ。だよもう喧嘩するぞ。喧嘩するって言ったよ。もうやめろもう。明日が俺を七夕か私がやっちゃった。はい忍ぶちょっとだが数千万のさ右翼勢力がこんな起こしました。中曽根さん小泉さんね、長浜市の297そう訪問しました。たまたまさ各番の自衛隊日本陸軍の後の陸自防軍になる隊員たちが来ました。小泉議長命令を言ったよ。もうほらびっくりした。何先生がさ捕まってたぞ。もう切れてもてもうすん今やぞいつもでっかいカバン持ってるから世のねあれ無線機で全部に命令した。週に武装蜂起しろって言ったよ。開始だって言ったよ。
next year, but the problem is neither of those outcomes is going to settle things definitively. Because the second referendum, it might well lead to a narrow vote to remain in the EU, and that will be a division in the United Kingdom. And of course, if Mr Johnson wins his majority, then we've got to negotiate relationship on trade, on security, on foreign policy cooperation between the United Kingdom, which will remain a big European power, a major player in defense, security and economic terms. But it's going to be next door to Europe. Those 27 countries are going to be my country's most important trading partner, our closest geographical democratic neighbours as far as I can see. So working that through,
弁解してるって弁解してたよいや冗談だよ川島からお会いするさお会いするさそれで来てましたよそれを訪問でまあ今の仲間いてびっくりしちゃった軍用車両でもうびっくりやった大変ですいったこれで以上鼻動きましたな台本竹尾先生捕まった捕まってたぞ当時まだ取り締まり方ヒーローさんも捕まってたぞJewmadda
we know that we need to create materials that are a lot more engaging, that are a lot more useful, and that are going to have an impact in the way that they learn and the way that they acquire the new skills that they need in order to remain competitive in the marketplace. One better way to do that through video games, as children we learn through playing, and believe that through gamification and through game-based learning, we can make learning fun again, not only for children, which we know is the best way to learn, but also from adults. If they play these video games, they will become more engaged, as I said earlier. They would also acquire that knowledge much more deeply, and they will be able to apply that knowledge in their daily jobs. And finally, by doing the video games through the simulators, they will be able to have experiential learning to get the feedback on what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, and learn from that.
助けろってもう軍が出動沙汰すんで軍が出動だからヒーローさん革命のヒーローになっちゃったはに
Very clearly, I think the world is moving towards a secular economy. It's a necessity.
会長ってたちNHK 解体してこの後 NHK が紅白歌合戦強行開催和田アキ子さんたち反対しました何初めて中止になりました中止になりました何なぜなら和田アキ子さんなんでおりっかがこの会社行くに何それで切れてよデモに参加デモに参加たまたま和田アキ子さんとかくやけど大阪収録行ってましたこれで大阪の現場でも大阪も混乱したね混乱してもね大変で行ったそう言った和田さんもう言ってはアッコにお回せこれ語ってアッコさんと三重龍太さんもいやねえ私もそうもう初めて参加してびっくり初めて混乱してもて相当混乱するし堀井貴文水温語ってましたね話の知識がなんですかほんとびっくりはい 本日今日の会合を開きました。そうか。逆にマネ教の先駆を。
Similarly, digitalization has allowed the falling of distribution barriers. So not only is production much easier, but the ability to distribute it to people is much easier. And we're really living in a golden age of entertainment with many more choices than we have. And that also means a greater democratization of ideas. And again, all this is happening on a global scale,
軍の医療機関で無事助かりました。柴田勝家ねえ、さあねえ、そう言います。どういう国ですか。さすがにびっくりした。本当にしまいました。
Okay, what is actually the
こんな下田何切れて持ってたね。私はね、ちょっと社員たち声優たちみんな混乱してた。でした。逆に言うとさあ、渡辺プロダクションの渡辺美沙たちしたいビザミの実はさあ吉本はね一斉にみんなのありました。あんたちもそうみんなそうしまいましたな。消えてもてそうでも祭る私の場合はまだ分からなかったこんな。いやしてたんやけどただ
But at the same time, it's also because we're facing something that is very complex. It's very difficult to understand the impact of climate change, and it's very difficult to understand the solutions to reach carbon economy. So in the world of investment, what I see is those who are actually acting every day to invest in climate change investments and low carbon economy investments. Susceptible to eco-anxiety because they see the result of the impact of what they do. But really what is needed to decrease this anxiety is more examples of impactful investment, change of behavior in society that would actually bring people to
逆キングレコードさあちょうど84が放映予定だったけどさどうしようかって検討したけど田中智之さんたち会見しました。紅白は中止するが84はちょうど野外で映画言いました。ハリー元祖コロナみたいな野外ムービーやらんかって元気つけようって言いました。それはいビオランテの時ねそれから軍がどうぞ爆撃も砲撃も結構でさもうやっちまったどうぞどうぞ爆撃結構簡単になった。この時ね冷凍兵器の研究に入ったデッドリーアイスねそことね出てきた結氷土デッドリーアイスね要は土は埋める死を意味するかこれで正解でした。たまたまシャイニングボースったんで結氷土だったんでな朝なんてびっくりこれであれだなセガサミートどうかって言ったん ああ、いいですね。逆に市民軍のレインブラッドで。だって、そういうことでした。まあ、要は。さあ、これは 9.11 以降から小泉さんが、何アメリカ大使館来ました。当時 9.11 事件で赤坂とね、虎ノ門のね、霞が関にあるアメリカ大使館ね、むっちゃ 9.11 警戒してます。むっちゃ警戒してたんやさ。自衛隊来てたと思います。マジで来てたと思うわ。多分俺ぐらい返しちゃうよさ。大使館もさ、護衛せざるを得なくなったな。さあ、護衛せ。トラブルになりました。まあ、私もね、今年初めてロシア大使館行ったわけびっくりしたさ。ものすごい。マジか。警視庁の面接びっくりしたさ。自衛隊の木刀持ってさ、あれびっくりしたさ。木刀持ってさ、やってる。すごいわ。木刀抵抗。すごいわ。すごいね。みんな。もうびっくりした。こうやってどうだ。そう、びっくりした。そう。したら、もう。一応5カ国の大使館訪問じゃないだんだな使館とかね、グリシャ大使館とかあとラオス大使館とか、あとタイ王国カンボジア大使館ね、そしてシリア大使館5カ国だしよ、今中国集まってるからねさだおいしの件でさあちなみにね、基本的にね他の国やと大使館相当厳しいらしい。厳しいらしいね。9.11 以降から厳しいらしいね。警察だな。プリキュアのさ多分藤井さんたち気づいたさ。やっぱりね、一部の練習さ、して
suggestions and the prescriptions of the EU as much as possible to make progress. And that is the moment when the magnet effect of European integration is really great. And by the way, has induced countries in the past, if we think of
作品にも来てたじゃん。もしかして鬼滅の刃。マジかよー。なんかシューみてえなんかツイッターの投稿あったね。来てたんじゃないかって疑った。なにー。ハラミ系も来てたじゃん、疑った。なにー。南ね、声優というか芸能でした。渡辺プロダクションでした。娘でした。なにー。なにー。別名水はミサですよね。水はミサでした。何さ学習しました。何びっくりしたさ。さあみんなインターの画像見てびっくりした。なんなんこういう変化してるさ。びっくりした。 階段かなと思ったりさ、ところが変な画像だと思った。いけたなと、なんかそっくり、なんかね、上田慎一郎やと思うな。上田慎一郎ですか。次はシェリルさんでした。シェリルさんでした。マジでかい。エンドはね、水飴そっくり。むっちゃ似てる。似てるって。遠藤健一さん、この件で2月1日に文句言ったの知ってるで。最低賃金と称してさ、訪問してますさ。ね。そして私ね、さあ、南の手を見てました。さあ、遠藤健一さん、そう対決してる場面あったから、あれでよう刑法とか民事訴訟とか刑事訴訟とか貸金業法とかいろいろ法律の字幕で、そうあれが今千原ジュニアさんが引き継いでるけど。
When one thinks about the 2015 migration crisis, it is true that we have gone a long way as a European continent. And we've gone a long way since 2015. We were hit with a massive crisis. Hundreds of thousands of migrants coming to Europe's shores. And that is not the case anymore. It is true that the overall numbers have decreased. But is that enough? Is it enough to just look at the overall numbers? Or should one also focus on what's happening within each?
よう南の帝王は見てた。むちゃくちゃ。見てた。あれ見てた。あって。中尾明さんも出てた。出てたからね。むちゃね。中尾さん。俺だってネクタイよ。中尾さん。じゃあ、そう。
The question one needs to ask is, has Europe done enough in order to alleviate the effects of the crisis throughout the entire EU 28? Has Europe done enough in order to share the burdens? And I say that particularly because when one looks at the figures regarding relocation of refugees across Europe, then one will realize that not enough has been done in that direction. And so one is led to the question, a Europe where we all share the benefits of Europe, or do we also want a Europe where countries also share burdens?
Well, now it is the end of the JIIA meeting, which was a great meeting. We have had excellent discussions, we have learned a lot, and we have thought a lot. And now I hope to see you in Paris next June. It will be a plenary session, and all of us, we shall be there. So please do come to Paris.
今回は俺が止めた。前もって投稿しといた。さあ、来ないかでさあ、来ないかで警戒してる。
Political parties. I can speak to the U.S. more than anywhere else. I was a member of our Congress for 9 terms and left because it became so partisan and dysfunctional. At the Wilson Center, we study this, and there are some remedies to the problem. But bottom line, in the U.S., our tradition is two-party. In Europe, there are multi-party systems in other countries, and we're seeing the rise of populist parties.
彦根でした。彦根か草津にしたりは。
Republican Party that is now dominated by our president, and we have a Democratic Party where most of the noise is coming from the far left. What we don't have is anything to represent the center, and that is the challenge for the U.S. going forward. That is something I work on, and that is something that the Wilson Center is hoping to improve, because if we are to convey at least a majority view in the United States, essential to making our foreign policy and domestic policy effective, we need to reach for the center so that we have. Hopefully, we'll advance that goal here at the Trilateral Commission.
今回は俺が止めた。ちょっと警戒した。今回は俺が止めた。さすがに警戒してたんだな。止めました。通報的投稿しました。通報的投稿して対処しました。しました。事前に。さあ、事前に投稿しました。先手は打っといた。この通り。ああ、この通り。対策は練っといた。対策は練っといた。画像はこれが最新でした。ああ、対策は練っといた。JIIA だ、アンジェリーナ・ジョリーやった。アンジェリーナ・ジョリー。何や。あ、これもしかして。あ、与野党とも一斉にさ、今呼び出そうかて。あ、呼び出そう。呼び出そうかて。リールコリアでした。先手は打っといた、事前に。打っておきました。藤井裕二さんたちも。疑ってもたね。先手は打っといた。毎日の。長間にはあるかなとなんか、黒髪はあるんやけどさ。滋賀 MM の関係者もさ。来たんがやっぱ苦情なんさ。ところはね、私の彦根か草津しか収録できないじゃん。分かった。声優に関してはね、実はネットカフェ、あそこで来れる。あれ、びっくりした。快活クラブ。知ってました、設備。そういうことでした。俺はこっち、Facebook。Facebook。ビルドバーグ。ビルドバーグ。目覚め知ってたんか、お前。俺がビルドバーグの関係者。みんなびっくりしたもう一つさ、エッティンがかもびっくり。エッティンがアーミー、星水アーミー、お前もしかして来てたのか。星アミちゃん、もしかしてこの件で長間に来てたんか。もしかしてさ、
and to speak with one voice in crisis. So the first step which we in the European Union need to take together
山口勝平来てたんじゃないですか。
our decision-making process. We need to go from consensus
山口勝平やろ通報したのさ。
We need to learn that all of us, whether we are 27 or 28, will only be listened to, will only be respected, and can only be a military actor in the world if we speak with one voice, and that requires majority voting. So that's step number one. And the next steps are capabilities, and we will need to work on that also. And then we can think of the long-term vision of a European army.
まあ俺はどちらかというとビルダーバーグの幹部級でした。首脳級でした。
I don't think anyone wins in trade conflicts, and even the word war is, I think, a bit overstated because wars end up being zero-sum. One wins, one loses. And in the case of trade, it should be a win-win operation. So I think the analogy is mistaken, and by closing off your own markets, you increase costs to your own people. In the United States, about 50% of imports are for commodities or intermediate goods, so if you raise those costs, you raise costs for manufacturers and consumers in the United States, or same would be the case in Europe. And in the case of the US and China, I think that we're in a very dangerous situation. I think that there are many reasons and frustrations with China. Some of them are justifiable about forced technology transfer, intellectual property rights, reciprocity. There's also concerns about Chinese security and other policies. But I think you can find allies within China on a number of the trade issues, and you actually want to try to push both sides to a rules-based system. So I think that the path that we're on with China has led to more of confrontation. And in fact, what you're probably going to need to see is some combination of competition, cooperation, and confrontation, or at least drawing lines on some issues. So I think with a country as big as China, you need a more multifaceted policy.
もうね、もうびっくりした。びっくりした。びっくりした。俺はね、ジョゼ・ウレッティンガーの息子やったってさ、びっくりしたさ。じゃなくて、山口勝平、お前、山口義雄やろ。お名前義雄やってんの。だから、お前、佐久間の件で恨んでたから。びっくりしたのさ。これ、7、佐久間でさ。烈火の炎や、そう、烈火の炎や。したーね。したなあれ、烈火したな。びっくりしたあれ。わあ、黄色な。びっくりしたわ。息子、今孫として。私のハトコでしたさ。ハトコ。色白でびっくり。アルビノ症っていう病気があるらしい。そう、これで、なんか、でもこれね、実は宇宙来てる人たちいるんやさ、これでな、そう、捨てないとあかんないしね、それで。最初疑ってもたんやけどね、まあ。
and weakening bonds between the mainstream parties and ordinary voters. Those four currents have been with us for a very long time, before the Great Recession, before the arrival of Facebook and Twitter and big tech, but they are now producing very substantive political effects and they will continue to produce substantive political effects. So liberal democracy has to change. It has to make its political systems more representative. It has to ensure that people feel that their nations and communities are secure and have strong, robust external borders. And it also, over the long term, needs to devise an economic settlement that ensures that everybody feels that they are getting the gains and the benefits of other groups in society as well. Very big challenges, no clear answer as to now. The ball is very much in liberal democracy's court.
So bringing trilateral to Slovenia means also bringing Slovenia to trilateral. And as you know, David Rockefeller Fellows had a program.
愛媛や。ああ、そう俺。
We connected them at the MCHM
そのまま行ってきてくれ。
Slovenian Business Society.
親父の命令で。
頼みで。
JIIA 結成しました。ここ。日本版のビルダーバーグ。
Prime Minister, who is the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Miro Cerar, had the time to meet with them and discuss
Chathamのメンツ
where
率いて
the Europe is
来
today
ました
and where the Europe is going. And of
来ました
course, we have finished our program
お
with
お、支
amazing
え
lunch with Professor Dana
そうね、
Zorn.
この方が今ね、ビルダーバーグのスター。お、ハイさんやっぱり。すごい。
No, liberal democracy will not survive in an unchanged form. It has not been changing
稲
enough
川
to
チェンジ。
accommodate the
さ
vast
あ、稲川聖者、
development
安藤
of
になっ
the
た
internet
な。
and of the communication
もう
technology.
びっくりした。あ、
And
安藤に
it
来た
has
ら
been
さ、
changing too much, given the rather static nature of men.
安藤って言ったら安藤にさ、上の芋下。
Do you have a crystal ball? We're in the middle of a psychodrama in Britain, political and social, and it's very hard to predict.
要は俺は愛媛県でさ、ビルダーバーグたるさ、結成しました。
I do not think it is certain that the British
ビルダーバーグ結成しました。うん。絡み行け、嘘つくの。大概にしろ。大概にしろ。嘘つくのも大概にしろ。
Protectionism is never a good solution for
ああ、吉田茂関係ないから。あ
because in the long run it will
あ、林さん
endanger
が言いました。はい。
the competitiveness
ま
of
あ
everyone.
実は林一家ね。
European
あ
car
あ
industry, whether
吉本のメンツ
you
た
talk
ち
about
とかさ、
OEMs or whether
こと
you
や
talk
さ
about
しつこいのは
suppliers,
北関東と新潟と長野でした。はい、あいつらしつこかっ
export oriented, is very successful on world markets.
た。あいつらがしつこかっ
Most
た。
of the companies are not only delivering cars to other parts of the
あ
world,
あ、しつこ
they
か
are
っ
also
た。
producing cars in those parts of the world.
ほんで、新山ね、
whether it's in
実は
the United States,
7リピ
whether it's in China,
制圧しました。
whether it's
制
in
圧しました。
Southeast
さ
Asia,
あ、
where they have
制
a
圧し
lot
ま
of
した。
success.
うん。
That means in the long run,
男ね、台湾の、
is
うん、
always the better solution for
北海道
economy
からさ、
and for the countries which want to safeguard
い
jobs.
や、森か。はい。古賀か。誠一。お前に。だからやっぱりエスタロと。まったけ。
A quantum leader is a new paradigm leader.
逆に言うとなんで私は青鬼の久保一家にあんまり。あ、久保一球児でした。はい。来た。 3局なんやけど逆に言うと JIA
I am you, you are me. Thus, a quantum leader would face, say, the problem of any
要は遺伝子操作食らってたさあ山寺浩一さん最初知ってました。やっぱりねさあ炎の記憶あれかさあ俺のことだったか堀兄弟の演じたさね分かるさ僕棍棒で叩かれさ思わされて恋のままさあその証拠に私0歳からさ3歳までの記憶はない、はい、入園の記憶もないさあないんですさあんねんやねさあ今愛媛県新山でしたはいさああれ13スオじゃなくて秋色ジョリーでした。G はなんていう J のラファラ秋色ジョリーでした。ピンガー家ねこそいジョリー家ボイット家とバートランド家どちらかバートランドでした。びっくりしたマーシェリンの姿見てびっくりやさ結成ねあらアタノさんかなと思ったらお前かわすみああ勝ってやっぱりね
asymmetric attacks on democracies. The point being that you can disrupt elections in democratic elections in a democratic countries rather than
難しかったかや俺のあれもうこそい多分もう結構もういいやあれさんすごい
the kind of issues you had in the U.S. presidential elections, where because of the electoral college system, some states had far more weight. I think we need to look at the kind of electoral systems we have and make sure that we get a broad representation rather than a simple binary decision. We need to think about our asymmetric advantages. We have rule of law.
お前もしかしてお前すいませんのエストラの息子か娘かはい娘はいすいませんの娘でしたなに遠藤って言ったさ遠藤健一さん知ってましたたち青ってさ青だ青にじゃなくてさ逆に言ったね竹内力さんの関西弁うまいねむっちゃうまい全然衛生量なかったらさ元から滋賀のぞいてほとんどだって髪型吉本弁って比喩されてる言いましたそういうことでしたかねはい逆に言うと私すいませんよしきさんでさもう千葉だけど時々小室さん事件でもほうやった小室さん事件
Silicon Valley provides a unique ecosystem, basically in some sense a network
水木
of that's very applied, that is all about working with the real world, doing basic research and then trying to put that basic research into the society, into the good. An important thing, I think, is also that it's a social network of sharing. Is that basically in California there is no non-competes, so people move around freely. And this means that the flow of innovation is much faster. The other important thing is the size, again, of very
あんみつさんねさごめんバカな姉貴の件でさちょっとまましてたに
I started working with Pinterest when there was less than 200 of us. 3 years later, there is a few thousand of us. And company culture and everything wasn't lost, and the new people got hired. And then I think the last thing is that universities as well as kind of companies focus less on protecting their IP and really trying to move as fast as possible. Because if we think about innovation is about moving fast, and it's not so much about building walls and figuring out how to do the next step very carefully. It's really about running and iterating fast. And if we run and iterate fast, then the success will be there, and kind of little details matter. And I think this is important from the viewpoint of university, letting the research in the public domain and really benefit the environments in which the university's professors operate, as well as in terms of companies sharing the information and flow of people with each other. So there is, for example, in Silicon Valley, a lot of different seminars, people from one company visiting the other company, sharing quite openly actually what they are doing, writing academic papers and talking about their latest solutions, so that we are more up to date and the entire system can help each other in terms of making the most innovation and the most progress in a short amount of time. Because I think the question is not can we innovate, but the question is, or can we invent something, but the question of innovation is,アメリカ本土がおかしいさ、なんかおかしいさ、なんかおかしいさ、なんかおかしいのさ、マーク・ザッカーバーグさんたちねさ、なんかおかしいなと思ったらさ、なんか EU とかね、ASEAN とかさ、なんか会合にさ、多分俺の画像さ、これ階段がでさ、なんかさ、なんかスプートニクさんの記事見たよ俺見てびっくりなさ、これロシア連邦議会がさ、呼ばれたトンネルでさ、クラブさんに
One of the challenges we are facing at the moment is still the migration crisis. And also the priority of the Austrian presidency is security and the fight against illegal migration. So we had a good discussion today on all these topics, and of course there are different opinions on this. But in general, we are always on the same line. We want to have a solution for the European Union and for Europe. Safe external borders and legal migration, because Europe will need it in the end. But people still have in front of their eyes the migration flood in 2015, and therefore it is really important to have a solution, and a solution which will be implemented in all the countries of the European Union to have a resilient European asylum system.
足よかさ、女性数少ないさ、ビルダーバーグメンツでしたさ、でもね、残念だけど藤上ちゃんと小栗旬さん、福山潤さん、この3名の姿勢では無理ですさ。吉田俊介の反対者さ、無関係ないけど、でも無理ですさ。この港階段に期待しないって言ったの。はい。知りましたさ、瀬戸ちゃんが言ったさ、海へねさ、今日は山口カッペ何山口カッペあいつの事件の時急に大使になったり三河関大将したりさ、シガトック作ったりさ、高橋メアリージュン急にさ、今奈々君たちこの件でさ出てましたさ、西川貴教に言った、ちょっと私の事件の時さ、シガトックあなたでしょってさ、言ったんやのこっそり。ああ言ったんやみんな。本当なのかって言った。Today, of course, at the Trilateral Commission,
presentation, we are going to discuss three
あ
scenarios.
ナナ君たち死にましたモンスト。さあサイト荒らしたやろこっそり。さあ
In these
実は
three
ね
scenarios,
さ
of course, there are different outcomes. What
あ
I
アク
would
セルワンの
say that
トマト。
confrontation
あ
in Turkey and
あ
is a
透明したさあ
and if it is only
あ
cooperation,
それとね
membership of Turkey to the EU,
滋賀県庁まで行った時さ
some sort of
画像大量に撮った
limited
消えて
cooperation.
た。あい
A scenario in
もう上がってた。
both
あみけ
Turkey and
目
the
覚
EU
めお前ら
are able to
これはいい
enjoy
加減にしろ
full potential. In
聖一
economics, we say
エスタロ
this
お前
is
ら
not
いい
cost
加減にしろお
effective.
前
But when it comes to EU membership,
こ
I
んいい
would
加
say
減
that
に
this
しろ
will mean full use of potential of Turkey and
山口カッペお前めいい加減にしろ本
a
当に
stronger, stable,
びっくり
respected,
した
fully democratic Turkey, but this
び
also
っくりした
means in the world scene a global actor of
俺の
EU,
せいで榎本敦子たち叩かれてる
peace bringing EU, welfare creating EU, employment creating EU. So I would say that in this case, membership case, the outcome would be win, win,
ああびっ
win.
くりした
So win for Turkey, win for the EU, but also win for beyond.
You will have to define what you mean by Europe and the
ワ
European
ーミンが
Union
ね
having its own army. I do not think
ワーミン
Europe
がね
needs
ジ
its
ョデ
own
ィさん
army for what I would qualify as the classical Article 5 NATO scenario. In
そ
other
れと
words,
もう
the
一つ
conflict with
14で
Russia.
どういうことだ
But
アンジェリーナ・
Europe
ジョリ
should
ーを
definitely,
してたこ
the
れ
European Union
押し
should
だが
definitely
押
develop
してたのさ
the possibility to project hard power without the United States
渡
of America.
辺
I can imagine a scenario
おい
in Africa
さあ
where you have a combination of terrorism,
これ
climate
大
change,
何
migration.
川澄
It's
で
an
す
ungovernable
何
Africa largely.
おい
Boko Haram meets Al-Qaeda, where Al-Qaeda meets Daesh. In other words, it's not impossible. Look at the French and what they did in
ああびっ
Mali.
くりした
That you would need to intervene
意外
militarily,
な
and
車
then
川
the
澄愛子
European
やったびっ
Union
く
would
り
be
し
on its
た
own.
大人
Second
大
scenario,
沢一回とびっくりしたね
virtual but not
びっくりしたさ
impossible.
岩田美園さんなんでやめたのさやっぱりなんさ
And we should not repeat the
Hey,
situation
wait a
like we had in the 90s of the previous century, where finally Bill Clinton and the United States of America had to come in to stabilize
あ俺は
the situation.
JIA 結成
I
論
could
者
think about
で
the
した
need for border protection, external border protection,
え
with military means. You're a bit on the
ダディ
moving
の
here
メ
between
ダディ
the
の未来
military
に来
and the
ました
military
さチャタムのメンツに来ましたさ
French. In other words,
さ
if that is meant by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel with a European army,
皆さん
I can
よ
follow
く
that.
アンジェリーナ・ジョリー
What we should
の
not
トルームレイ
forget,
ヤーのね
by the way,
ラ
is
ラ
when
クラフト
you
おしよう
talk
か
about
本当
European
は
military
レ
intervention,
イラ
that's
ーク
why
ラ
I
フトって
like
言います
qualification
European
European army
レイ
not
ラークラフ
not
トって言い
much,
ます
is that there will always
レイ
be
ラークラフト
national
って言います
parliaments
クラフト
who will decide
レ
if
イラークラ
those
フトって言いま
soldiers
すさあ
will
レイ
be
ラー
sent
クラフトって
into
言いま
harm's
すさ
way.
あ
So they will not, I hope, talk about a European command and a European parliament which decides this goes to the heart of the sovereignty of nations, and those nations will want to decide themselves. I see the way out as presented by President Macron of France, the European Intervention Initiative, where you can build coalitions of the willing
俺アン
outside
ジェ
the
リーナ・
EU
ジョリーの
institutions. You can
ド
build
イツでし
coalitions
た
of the willing, which you will always need for such
それ
kind
と
of
同時に
military
日
operations.
本国内の滞在
The
者
advantage
は
of a
愛媛
coalition
県
of
新
the
山
willing
市で
is
した
after Brexit, you can keep Great Britain on board
おお
because
思っ
they
た
will
青の
not
久保行ったの
anymore be
オ
a
ー
member of the
スオ
European
ース
Union.
じゃないのオ
At
ー
the
ス
same
だった
time,
のさ
PESCO,
び
permanent
っ
structured
くりした
cooperation, should of course continue. Important
す
project,
ごいね
but
本当
rather
に
bureaucratic and rather cumbersome.
怪しいかも
So that
びっ
would
くりした
be my answer to the question: Does Europe need its own army?
だから JIA びっくりしたうん中国の
What can we do in order for democracy?
戦略
So I'd like that to be the main theme for our conversation, and I can simply leave it with at that and ask you, so what does it take?
証拠を渡せって。はあ。おい。おい、水雨、何をやったお前ら。腹見て、お前ら何やった。いい加減にしろお前ら。まだかニューヨークの連邦地帯とかよ。お前ら読まれてる知ってるぞこっそり。だけど自分で書かれたものね赤刻印かなんかわからんけどそれで言ってるぞ。シンガポールね。アメリカ政府からはい、ベトナムやっぱりなベトナムベトナムの首脳陣もやっぱり出たらやっぱりねジョーニーとホーチミンもじゃねえかなだから岸信介よかった各岸信介潰しやっちゃった架空だけどね恩慈教分裂しました恩慈教分裂したね残念でした
Suffering, meaning, and responsibility. And the case for suffering, I think, is quite obvious because one of the things that I point out to my listeners is that life has a tragic element. We all are perfectly aware of that. And that we're subject to that as fragile and finite creatures. And that
やっぱりね、SIA と関係あったわ。東京だったアセアム麻生太郎さんもね、私は今大間クラブの逆に言うとね、なんか勘違いじゃないか、そう言ったりしてね、もう言っとくから吉田氏関係ないけど、麻生って正解だ通りに家系図見ても分からんけど俺言ったんだけどしつこかったんだけど、あれが断席したんでしつこかったよなんか小泉氏にそっくりななんか言ったのなんかあったな言うちゃ小泉か思ったら九州やそう本当からそうした小泉そうCSIS のメンバーですそうメンバーですあれ君はね逆に言うと意外と慎重やったそう彼意外と井上の件で
lost in some sense without a uniting narrative. And a huge part of the narrative that has united democratic countries since their foundation isn't the doctrine of rights. And it's not the doctrine of individual happiness. It's the doctrine that the individual is the sovereign foundation of the and maybe of itself, which is something that I don't believe. Consciousness plays in existence itself. And that it's useful and necessary to call to people to remind them of their responsibility as sovereign individuals. And so I'm encouraging people to develop a vision for their life
まり言及してん。
to adopt full responsibility for themselves
目覚めとね、さあ、あらみけ、身内同士でさ、
their narrow self-interest or happiness, but to something that's much broader in scope, to think that each person should
多分、双方のメンツ、そう、
to take care of
分
themselves,
裂した。そう。
but also their
あ
future
と、
self, because each of us is a collective that stretches across time, and whatever
音
you
字
do
教が
in
分裂して
the
た。
present merely means that you sacrifice yourself in the future, and that's not a
もちろん原因はやっぱり、いえ、じゃなくて、そう、エイベックス事件、そう、やっぱりな、ドンになった。ごめん、TK 小室哲哉さんさ、彼ネットバンキングそうやってた。俺、彼の預貯金口座、パーにはさ、俺ね、揉めて、ピー来たんやさ、下にさ、来たんや。どういうことに来たんそれでもう、それ時短制して、お借金、さあ、借金の分返済、ケース持ってきた。なんも、
that actually constitutes something of singular importance.
これな。
And that's an old religious idea in some sense, that each person has a soul, let's say, that is somehow a center of reality itself, and that needs to be manifested in life itself. And that if it isn't manifested, then something of tremendous value is not brought forward. And worse, and this is the end of the case, let's say, and worse, to the degree that that's not brought forward, then something hellish moves in to take its place. And people understand this sort of thing a lot more clearly than you might think if you explain it to them as if they would understand. And then it gives them a series of purposeness that straightens out their life. And so my sense is the way that you revivify democracy is by remembering its fundamental insistence that the individual is at the cornerstone of the state, and that everything you can possibly do to fortify the individual simultaneously, the individual is the eyes of the state, where the living individual is the eyes of the dead state,
これを聞きたい。
and the living individual
お前、あの画
revivifies
像
the state.
どこやったさあ、どこやった
To the degree that we forget our concentration on the sovereignty of the individual,
知っ
the
てたん
divine
や。
sovereignty of the
あんまり言えないさ。
then
無理やったんやさ。
democracy is based. And then people look for alternatives. They search meaning elsewhere in extremist movements of one form or another, or they collapse into a kind of dialogue that's completely counterproductive. And so, well, so that's been my experience.
意外と使いたい。いやいや。部外で。
So this morning we had a session on the future of mobility, and we actually discussed what does it mean for the auto industry and what does it mean for the cities. If you look at the auto industry, there has never been as much change as there is today. On the technology side, connectivity, electrification, autonomous driving. On the social domain, the sharing, more urbanization, and new ways of working. And also on the regulation side, where it's about emission control and standards, and also on regulation for managing congestions in the city. So we actually covered that. Also what is
びっくりしたさ、藤村のここよ。確かに聞かれた。 好きだろって言った。そう、これは良かった。逆に言うと。そう、知ってたよ。そう、暴言でよ。本当に？おい、マジか。そう、すごい。やった。すごく。簡単さ。水沢、ほら、お前ら。カッペイだった。カッペイ、お前漢字すまんないヒデ。逆に言ったらヒデさんの機嫌使ったらちょっと厳しくした。だからね、ちょっと厳しくしました。
Approximately 25% of the global GDP as an additional public and private debt outstanding. That was a major cause. Another cause was the new emerging properties of the new global finance system with the impact of technology, new IT technologies and globalization. And amongst the properties, the emerging properties that I could witness myself when I was president of the ECB in 09, 10, 11 was that the contagion was taking place very rapidly. You know, in the old times, you would expect that a major shock here would be transmitted to the rest of the world as a matter of or even quarters. In the new world in which we are, it's a matter of half days, and we could experience that in 08.
おいしょの渡辺さん、ごめんね、ごめんね、あと渡辺直美さん、すみません、誤解です。楽でした。さあ、水沢の渡辺プロでした。そうさん、切ってました。そういうことでした。まあ、最後にこれ。これ見せながら終わりました。はい、こういうことでした。